That work at the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Thanks for the time this morning. Thought I was going to have a little more time before starting. I thought Ellen was going to take up an hour and a half or something. Nothing, but we're ready to go. Good morning. I believe I sent comments.
On the website.
Okay, great, thank you. So this, you should have access to this. And I'm going to start off more general. Well, first of all, thank you for your work on addressing our housing crisis, improving environmental protection, and strengthening the planning and permitting processes.
There's a interrupt. Do you the thing we're just referring to? I think your written testimony that you yeah, just wanted to check with people. I didn't know if you were sending a PowerPoint or putting one up.
No PowerPoint today.
All right. No,
Maybe some other day, but
we'll be graphics.
so yeah, this is actually touching these kind of introductory comments. Obviously, to get into more details, we may sort of dive into some detail. And well, what I provided you is some general comments and then some specific comments on individual sections of S311. So the general comments, because there's a lot of moving parts here. The S311, one part, obviously you have S308 that's been on your table, and then what's happening in the House with H 687. And for us, this is all kind of part of a system that all works together. So they are also well, first off, we support the recommendation that came out of the 3 summer study committees, which was the Act 250 study on necessary updates or something like that. The state designation study that VHCD did, and the regional planning study that the RPCs did. Each of those 3 bills I mentioned do contain provisions implementing those recommendations. Second comment, we generally support the housing program provisions of 311, and I'm not really going to provide any comments on those housing programs. We didn't do a deep dive on the housing programs, but there is a real significant need for the state to pull all levers possible to encourage more home construction, especially considering the loss of homes due to flood damage this year and the previous year. The lack of adequate housing is negatively affecting almost every aspect of living in Vermont, contributing to the high cost of housing, the lack of additional property tax revenue, so the kind of the opportunity cost of not having more construction happening, the impacts on workforce, on hiring, our economy, and we do truly believe that increasing the housing supply should help to reduce the increasing cost of housing. We believe there's a significant need to expand housing programs and update Act 250 at the same time to address the housing crisis, including equity considerations, encouraging all types of housing in our communities. Home ownership is the key to wealth creation for our residents, and more housing supply is necessary to address the alarming gap in home ownership rates between white and black Vermonters. White Vermonters, 72% of white Vermonters own homes. Anybody want to guess? I won't make you guess. 21% of black residents. Yeah. A 3 to 4 times disparity. Getting more to the bills, I think it's our hope that 687 and 311 get combined in some way, and maybe with some of the provisions from 308. 687 provides a framework for long-term system change by updating the way the regional plans, Act 250, and the designation programs work together to better achieve the state's land use goals. 311 has some immediate Act 250 exemptions and many other housing provisions that should be considered to address the housing crisis in the short term. Number 5, we would like to see the final bill keep short-term Act 250 exemptions similar to those in 311, while starting the process for longer-term system change in the plan permitting designation process as proposed in 687. Currently, the connection between Act 250 and planning is only via criterion 10, with a basic consistency check between projects and plans. We believe a new system outlined in 687 with permanent Act 250 jurisdictional changes will more strongly support implementation in the medium and long term of municipal and regional plans in terms of encouraging housing in areas planned for growth and better protecting the state's natural resources in other areas. RPCs will support this work so that all community can participate regardless of local capacity. And that's really a comment about our smallest municipalities. And, can they go through a process, just an application process, or whatever it is with regards to Act 250 jurisdiction. I think there's a real commitment from the RPCs to really support those smallest towns in whatever process is laid out in statute at the end. So just want to make sure you're aware of that. And then now I'm going to get into specific comments on Act 250 sections of 311 that we feel that need modified, and maybe where we have questions. Provide clarity. Yes, sir.
Just a quick clarification. I wasn't quite sure I caught. You said was it the only connection between was it municipal plans or RPCs when you were talking about criteria intent?
Yeah, I mean that's really the only
check in with the town plan.
Exactly, that's right.
But other than that, there's no cross reference, for instance, to a regional plan or regional development.
Yeah, keyword. And in the bigger picture, what we've been working on with 687 is really to have more of a bottoms up planning process from the municipalities through the RPCs that is then supported by the regulatory system. So right now, the Act 250 got put in place really before a lot of town and regional planning work got done. And so it's a pretty flat, blunt instrument across the landscape. Sorry, this is a whole Vermont. Act 250 applies pretty consistently. Although over the last 20 years, we've done some tweaks, right? We've done downtowns, we've done growth centers, we've done neighborhood development, village centers. So we've done some tweaks affecting Act 250 in those particular places. And what we've been working in the House on 687 is it is another significant move on building off those tweaks that we've done over the last 20 years to really have the Act 250 regulatory system and the designation system really support the local and regional planning that has been going on, or much better support.
And if you're going to get to it in more detail, or if we can pass over, but the question I want to just ask is, as I've been listening the last few months, the conversation around housing sort of cats back and forth without using its blinkers. Affordable housing versus housing, and they get conflated. And one of the concerns, for instance, that we discussed very briefly yesterday, was when we eliminate priority housing projects that have an affordable component to them, they only be 20%, they only be temporarily affordable. But we're sort of washing out programs that was aimed specifically at folks who are having trouble with inspiration. Then you couple that to the fact that we're seeing record increases in housing period. So lots of people, when median price starts to approach 500,000, it is out of reach for a lot of people. So I think although housing is front and center for like our concern, I think we have always talked about affordability here and wedded it to that, for instance, stretch code, so that things were energy efficient. And yes, took a larger upfront investment to build to a higher level of efficiency, but then had lower carrying costs for people who are already stressed on income. So I don't know if that's something you're going to get to, or
yeah, I think further down here when I get into specific comments, we are suggesting, and I'm not sure we're completely understanding how 311 is intended to work, but we're going to suggest that maybe we keep the priority housing projects. And we also kind of share that concern of using a little right now, because that's another Act 250 amendment we made over the years, right? Is to give a priority for priority housing projects with 1% affordable. I mean, kind of interested to hear from the affordable housing developers, but and I'm sure you will. I think you have Kathy Dyer scheduled later this morning, right?
Right after you left from
or not,
or soon,
yeah. Coming soon to a theater near you. I think we just want to make sure that the folks doing affordable housing developments aren't caught in kind of a whipsaw, like, oh, you're exempt this year, now you're not exempt, and it takes quite a bit of time to get one of those projects to happen. Full disclosure, I'm the chair of the Upper North Board. So, we have a couple hats, so I do have some interest in that, happening. I have not had a direct conversation with Kathy recently about, how, Evernorth, which was housing, Vermont, feels about it, but they are, obviously the largest affordable housing developer.
Thanks, I just wanted to
Yeah,
not lose sight of it.
yeah,
It does shift out of focus, on a daily basis, and we're just trying to keep our eye on exactly what's going to happen.
For a little context, my understanding is that when Act 250 was first developed, that Governor Davis had envisioned planning as an essential element of that system. And I would say from my experience when I chaired a district commission, that there were many times when people came in, people complained about people just throwing roadblocks. That what was really going on, in my opinion, was that their objection was not to the particular violation of a particular criterion, but it was that they didn't want this there at all. No matter what the developer did. There was the opponent's view was this just shouldn't be at all. And that was a question that, again, as originally conceived, Act 250 would ask and answer before anything started.
yeah.
And it becomes kind of after the fact or during the fact.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't put that in our comments, but I think it's a really good perspective, and I think it's largely informed a lot of our testimony in the House on 687. Is that we never really effectuated that capability development plan that was supposed to be attached to Act 250 to guide and kind of move some of the conversations upstream, right? Like, let's talk about these issues in our plans and maybe in our zoning locally. And to me, that's what this whole effort is trying to do, is trying to move some of these debates and decisions upstream so that people should know what to expect is going to happen next to them, right? That's where the anxiety comes. It's like, oh, I didn't know that was going to turn into a multi-unit housing development. And I think one of my hopes, and having worked in other jurisdictions where this was more of the system, like you had to pay attention to planning and zoning, the regulatory stage, because that's where the decisions were getting made. Once we got the permitting, things were gonna follow the rules that got set in place. And for better or worse, without that stronger connection between the plans and the regulations, we've had a system where things are getting, there's the debate's much wider at the permitting stage than it should be or is in the other places around the country. So thank you for asking that.
That was something we were trying to do that at the council. On Act 174 with energy planning.
Yeah, that's right.
Plan ahead.
That's right.
So that developers know where to go and expect like the approval as opposed to getting the CPG process at the PUC to really find out.
And it's a large extent, actually, thank you for bringing that up, Chair. I think that's a great example where trying to do the plan. And I think as a state, I think we hear a lot less controversy about those renewable, not that there isn't any. There's always, are not unusual for some neighbors to be upset, but like we're able to have conversations with the renewable energy developers much further upstream to say, hey, yeah, you're in a good place, or you're gonna have some issues. You might want to rethink what you're proposing here. And I think that is hopefully preventing a lot of issues that were happening previously. So same idea. Thank you. Okay, sorry, just a few more minutes. I got specific comments on 311. So now I'm going to zoom in. Page 1, section 2, line 18 plus. So this is right on kind of the first page, where we start to have this 75 unit change in jurisdiction from 10 to 75. One general comment to start is 687, we'll talk about 50 units, whatever. We're agnostic about the number, 50 or 75, whatever encourages the right number, great, do it. This needs to be consistent. And in our minds, when we think about this from the short term to the long term, jurisdictional change just needs to be consistent. In other words, we don't want to create incentive that the short-term benefit is better than the long-term benefit, or else we'll never get to the long-term change. So, but
Sorry, so you're saying that I want to understand what you're saying, are you saying that the interim exemptions can't be better than the long-term? So you're probably about to explain that. Maybe I should just.
I don't have a lot more to say about that, other than we don't want to disincentivize the long-term system change that undergird the whole planning designation Act 50 system.
Can you explain how the interim exemptions you think may not be sweeter, let's say, than the long term?
I don't know if I can answer that question the way you phrased it.
It's all right. Well, I'm happy to rephrase.
Yeah, no, I think 75. I just in the House in 687 they've been talking about 50.
Yeah.
This is 75.
Yeah.
That just needs to be reconciled. I think the general comment. You know, either way.
This is one of the things that I have in my head. Is like. It's like if you open the door, how do you fly it back once the long-term thing happens? And you know, I want to stay open to, you know, what's needed and useful and what's expedient, you know, for our crisis right now.
Yeah.
But I'm also just aware of like, just like the zeitgeist of like, you have this freedom and now you don't, you know, like that's just really, it's a hard
ideally,
transition.
you want to like say, let's do something short term, open it this much, and then and then create some incentive to do the long term system change.
Right.
Maybe it gets a little bit better when the long term system gets in place. I will admit that maybe we're not fully understanding. There's several jurisdictional changes and exemptions in the front of this bill that I'm not sure we understand how they all exactly are expected to work together.
Okay.
So that's really the context of these questions or comments. The second part of this is, and just because this has been a major focus of in 687, is just some acknowledgement that we also need to be careful about not encouraging new housing construction within our flood zones and river corridors. And so we're suggesting that that whatever this jurisdiction change or exemption that would allow exemptions outside of those flood corridors and river corridors. Number 2, in lines 19 to 20, the language is just a little, the phrasing is a little odd. It's not clear if it's 75 units are the jurisdictional threshold for the whole town. If the town has water and sewer in a part of the town, we think the intent was 75 units in the part of town that has water and sewer. So we just have a suggestion to say on those lines, attractive lands, delete that comma. I think is maybe causing part of the issue. Serve, and then kind of flipping those next few phrases, served by municipal water and sewer, located within a municipality with permanent zoning subdivision. Because there's really two criteria going on there. The town has zoning subdivision, and then there's the area of water and sewer. So I think just rewording that.
Can I ask a question?
Thank
you, Mr. Chair. When you think about projects in your region, how many were in the last few years? Is it a striking number that would have, with this change from 10 to 75, not have gone through Act 50? Is it a lot of development? Like what in the real world would this change?
Yeah. Three aspects. Sorry, three things come to mind. One is I'm not sure I'm the best region to ask.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Greene County has been the region that's taken most advantage of the growth centers and downtowns and neighborhood designations. And so I try to put that hat aside. I think so it's a hard question to answer because I think in a way trying to remove a barrier in the hopes that more development come forward that would be under this threshold, whatever the threshold is, and we're trying to encourage
Yeah,
behavior by the private sector
yep,
in a different way.
yeah, have you gotten a lot? Is
So
the
the NRB
10%?
may be able to
Maybe I'll
better answer what side projects and things go through, I mean, I do hear anecdotally, we are tracking our housing projects, but it's very clear that developers are moving forward in places where they can avoid Act 250, which is why our towns have been getting the downtown designate or the neighborhood designation in particular, the growth center. And then, you know, we certainly hear people that are trying to, this has been going on for a long time, they're under the threshold.
Yeah, they go 9, 10.
Right, and so we know that where you draw that number the private sector will react to it, right? And, you know, if you change it to 15, I'm sure we'll see 14 instead of 9, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, I think that deserves some thought. I do think it will, and based on my experience, somewhat here, but also working in other jurisdictions, the private sector will react to the incentives that you create in the regulations. I don't know what number that would be, more than we get now.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand, like, if you were saying, oh, yes, we get tons of projects that are 30 units, and if that's a huge swath of the applications that we think, you know, I guess I would love to see like a chart that showed like, what are the ones that are applying, like how big are these? Because 75 units feels big.
Yeah.
And I even look at downtown White River, I don't believe we have a building that has had 75 or more units proposed.
Usually it's multi-building site. We certainly
So that feels pretty big. And so I'd like to understand, is it really that you're getting those applications and that would have a big impact, or is it kind of the smaller side which we could look at, the 50 versus 75 conversation?
Yeah.
So I'll save those questions, and maybe there's a beautiful chart or something. Units, applications.
Yeah, and some of it has been happening outside Act 250 also, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we've been tracking the number of units in total in our region, but not by project. So, but I don't know, maybe my staff does have by project information, so I'll kind of check and see if we have some.
Dude, that'd be cool, but I just, you're the most, in Chittenden County, I think of you as having the most likely large development, and this is benefiting you to have a larger number. But in a small community.
Yeah. No, and we certainly, we certainly feel the pressure of the demand, right, as do our surrounding regions, frankly. You know, the fact that we're not building enough housing in Chittenden County puts more pressure on Lamoille, Washington, and Addison, Franklin counties, and Greenup. Back to subsection 1 there. We understand that section 8D, which is further back, maybe on page 6 or so, repeals this jurisdictional change on June 30, 2029. We would like to see some connection so that date certain for when this ends is helpful, I think, for the long-term system change. That's another incentive.
Sorry, what page were you? Or section?
I was referring to section 8D. I'm not sure what page that's on.
That's okay. That's on. Thank you.
I think page 9 maybe.
Yeah.
But up in section on page 1, with this exemption, and it does have that date back there, we would also like to see that maybe the jurisdictional changes in place until the permanent jurisdictional change when the regional plan maps, future land use maps are approved and the tier, you know, whatever 1B or 1A, whatever it is, goes into effect. So it's kind of an off ramp that we don't have to wait till 2029 if the plan, the NRB or ERB is there, they approve our map, that this provision, this interim exemption would be replaced by a permanent exemption when that map is approved. That makes sense.
Sorry, are you saying even if that's sooner?
Yeah, sooner than 2020.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So, right, in general, like if we can do the work with our communities to get a good plan in place and really better define the geography where it should apply, then let's use that more refined information that has more local buy-in, and do that. So I refer to it as an off-ramp. I'm sure that's the right, certainly not the right legal term, but just the opportunity to get to the permanent jurisdictional change when those plans are approved. So just kind of connecting short-term to long-term. Comment B on this section is there's a lot of striking out of priority housing project exemptions. At least in our mind, we're thinking that we should look at retaining those priority project exemptions. Unless the municipality achieves a tier 1A status. Again, this is, I apologize, I know I feel like I'm crossing apples and oranges here, but that's, you know, terminology in H 687. Comment C here in section 2. This provision exempts any housing project with up to 30 units from Act 250. If the municipality has just zoning subdivision bylaws. That I think is trying to mimic some of the conversations that have been going on in H 687 about tier 1B communities. And in general, we kind of support that notion, but would like to see a little bit more geography attached to it. And maybe it's the quarter mile to the villages, half mile from the downtowns. And then if this is 1B, I would recommend it be consistent with the NRB study, which recommended 50 units for 1B.
For how many years?
I don't think there was a year restriction attached to it.
But what are the years today? With the current limits?
This doesn't really exist today. The 5, you're talking about the 5 year,
Yeah.
10 years, 5 years, yeah. Yeah, that's what's in the current statute. So it's 10 years.
We up the number.
Yeah,
You would have us up the number of,
that's right. Yeah.
but not change the number of years. That's what I think we're.
I'm sorry, I guess by inference, I'm really saying delete the number of years. Like, that's kind of an artificial, I don't know. To be honest, I think of it as somewhat exclusionary provision in the law that kind of says, oh, we don't want, we've decided this is a good thing, but we don't want too much of it too fast. And that to me is an artificial constraint on the market that is not really helpful in places where we say we want to have development.
So it could be as fast as you want.
Right.
Come back next week and do it again. Be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then the next week and do it again.
Yeah, we need a lot more housing if that's what you wanted to do and we had the money and the wherewithal to do it. I guess we would applaud you. You'd be a hero, a housing hero anyway.
Well, if I'm a landlord now, I probably get the money. Which makes me a bigger landlord.
That's possible. I don't know. In Chitty County, we don't see that kind of the largest developers we see, they're taking on one large project and it's taken a lot of years to work through. They've got Chris Snyder in Williston right now. And of course the name of the project is gonna escape you, but it's right out of Cass Warren, where he's been developing a couple hundred acres for years now. So it's I haven't really seen that kind of action happen from the private sector. Maybe this was spurt, but I'm a little doubtful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator McDonald has brought up an interesting question that I've thought about. We kind of talk about this amorphous developer, like the developers, they feel this way. The developers, they have strong opinions. And I only really know personally 2 developers. And I know them because they're very active in Hartford. Matt Busey and Steve Davidson. And I guess you could say Byron Hathorn too, but there's different folks who are very involved and very well-known developers, and they do tend to own quite a bit of property. And I'm wondering if you could describe what the landscape is where you serve. Is it large companies that are building these, and they have many different units and we're getting this kind of large scale company ownership of many projects, or as you were seeming to describe now, you have individual developers with. I'm just wondering, what's the dynamics here? Are we talking about lots of different developers who are doing small projects, or are we talking about big companies that are doing the majority in your region?
I mean, I think my sense is for the most part, they are local people, right? So I mean, I don't know where Chris Snyder lives, but or Eric Farrell,
Oh,
he
okay.
did King Brain Rise in Burlington, right? A large project, and so those are a couple. But I've also, it seems like I've been in Vermont for this is 16 years now. It seems like there's actually fewer folks
Yeah.
that are doing work. So
Yeah, it seems like
when I try to look at the longer term perspective of what's happened in the development world, I do think that the regulations that we put in place decades ago, we don't have a lot of medium-sized builders.
Yes.
We have custom home builders, and then we have a few people that are doing larger projects. And I think it's going to take a while for the market to respond to a change in ability or opportunities. And I guess my hope in this is that there are more builders and developers that kind of evolve into the ecosystem here to fill in some of that missing middle. We talk about, we're building custom homes at the high end of the market, the over 600,000 plus. And then we're doing affordable housing or very small units. Both the Snyder and the Farrell developments I'm thinking of are very large. They're hundreds of units, but they're probably the average unit size might be, I don't know, it's in the hundreds, right? It's not over 1,000 because they're doing apartments and condos and things like that. And so we don't really have things in the middle. So anyway,
so I guess I don't.
I feel like the kind of the ecosystem is a little, I was gonna say broken.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll back up to damaged at least.
Yeah.
Like, because we kind of have created a system that hasn't enabled the middle of the market person to stay in business here.
That's very
hard.
Yeah, I think your aspiration about kind of seeing fewer developers has also been my experience.
Yeah, no, I think it's a hard business. It's not, I don't think it's I mean, they're putting capital and there's risk and it takes time. They got to be able to have the wherewithal to withstand years of process, maybe appeals, things like that, right? Cool. Sorry, comment D here. That we had a couple suggestions on the priority housing projects that just add a couple of things to maybe have them at least extend until the end of 2026. And then also allow them to continue in the downtowns and village centers as part of our regional plans approvals. I'm going to switch to page 6, section BD at the top there. And again, I think we're kind of struggling with how that 75, the 30, and then this provision work together. This provision seems to provide a complete exemption from Act 250 for all development within a quarter mile of village centers or half mile from downtowns. We think there's a typo at the end of that, but it should say downtown.
Designated center.
Yeah, right. Well, and we generally support this concept as supporting smart growth and the planning work that has been going on under the land use goals. We would like to see this exemption probably limited to municipalities with zoning and subdivision bylaws and within water and sewer service areas. So the reason we bring this up is we have the village center program has been very good for our villages and getting tax incentives and getting some reinvestment in our village centers. But we have 240, okay, sorry. I'm on the downtown board, I should know this, but it changes every month. We get another couple, which is great. They're coming in to get really those tax incentives and financial incentives to reinvest in their villages. But there are quite a number of them that don't have regulations in place. So we're just concerned with removing Act 250 without the municipality having a regulatory scheme to, review development.
Can I ask a quick question on that one?
Yeah.
So I have heard, I don't know how often it happens or representative, I know King County is more intensely developed, so I've heard that. But the comment was, that smaller towns without, full-time planning staffs, et cetera, that they rely on Act 250 to do their permitting process and the planning process. And so, while some people see it as an obstacle, other people see it as a resource that they can rely on, to help them manage growth in their town. Can you say a little bit about that? Using Act 250 in that way.
Actually, thanks for bringing that up, and that may be an additional comment that we should make. Is one good provision I think got added to 687 is kind of an opt-out. So if the community did not, like, rather than having the exemption or jurisdictional change apply just universally, if a municipality wanted to opt out, and I don't know, Ted may speak to this too, but if they want to have Act 250 apply, they should have that option. And so, and there's a balancing act going here, because, and we do hear that in terms of staffing, and we certainly, some of the RPCs are serving as like part-time zoning administrators and things like that for town. So, we are trying to support them or even helping them develop the regulations. So we are trying to support that. But it does take, you gotta have at least a part-time zoning administrator. Somebody's got to enforce your zoning bylaw if you're gonna have one. And they may not want to do that. They may want to just rely on Act 250 as their, which seems perfectly fine. And in which case there would be kind of that opt-out division here somewhere. In the short term also, it's in 687 as an opt-out, where they can retain Act 250 jurisdiction if they want. Sorry. In this provision, because it seems kind of, there's no cap on this, right? It's just you're exempt from Act 250. This is kind of similar to what was talked about as Tier 1A in the NRB study. And this is kind of a question we're wondering, if this is 1A, which was kind of that area to be fully exempt, like, okay, but that does mean you've got good zoning and you got good regulations in place that the municipality are ready to take on that obligation and burden as a municipality. But we wonder how this relates to the 75 unit jurisdictional change in section 2. Like, do we need the 75 if we have this? So and again, I just, and maybe we need to spend some more time to understand how these jurisdictional changes and exemptions work together, including where they apply. So concerned with not being as constructive as we ought to be at the moment, but I don't think we have our heads fully wrapped around it yet. The last, just a quick last few comments. Page 6, section 4. We support the public awareness signs. One minor suggestion is, rather than making, I think right now it has the district commissions paying for these signs. Where I used to work, it was the obligation of the applicant, but they had to follow guidelines. In this case, it probably would be developed by the NRB, that no matter where you were in the state, you kind of saw a consistent chicken sign. The color, the size, type sign, like what they're supposed to put on the sign. Comment number 4 here, page 7, section 5. Right now, this makes optional that the NRB may, by rule, allow the acceptance of permit or permits of approval of the state agency. We think that maybe that should be changed to a shall, but that should be required.
Page 7.
Page 7.
Well, I think
that's
what it says.
Yeah.
It's a shall by rule.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's missing the by text for my notes didn't have that. It's missing the by rule phrase.
Oh, okay.
Are we on line 1 there?
Right.
So instead of may by rule, shall by rule.
Right. And Peter can speak for the NRB, but maybe they don't feel like they need a rule, in which case you can ignore that comment. But Page 7, section 5, line 5. A bit of concern about criterion 9 and 10 being removed from this, or being considered. We recommend that they be removed from this provision. Because a municipal permit is not necessarily evidence of conformance with either of those two criteria. So,
Which two criteria?
9 and 10. I think it's on line 5.
Page 7.
No, remind me what
Oh,
criterion is.
So 10 is consistency with the town and regional plans. 9 is more about sprawl control. Yeah. Page 9, section 8. Again, these are more minute comments here. Line 4. If the priority housing project provisions remain, then we recommend that you retain paragraph P there. NBSA 681P. Page 9, section 9, line 19. We support adding this reference to housing targets for municipal plans. These last couple are supportive. Page 10 plus section 10. There's a whole bunch of like clarifications from the Home Act from last year with regards to municipal parking and zoning. I can't remember all that's there, but I think we're just supporting any things that make those provisions clearer. And then our last comment is around sections 23 to 26, which are pages 21 to 29. This is a one-line comment, so not diving into detail, but those are the long-term Act 250 change sections. And just at least at this point, we didn't do a deep dive into what is in 311. We've been kind of investing our time on the long-term change in 687. So we're just suggesting to look at 687 for that long-term system change provisions.
No way. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had the chair of economic development come in and recommend to us that we not address the tiers at this point, that we wait to do public outreach and then do the tiers, like have a longer process. I'm not sure if that process was how that's spelled out necessarily in the bill, but I'm wondering if you could reflect on that suggestion.
I don't want to disagree with the senator, but I think there's some place in between. I think we need a structure in place in statute of what we're trying to head towards. And then the comment about the need for engagement is good. That absolutely does need to happen. And I think that's really what many of us have been working on H60 687 about. So all these things that's why we're talking about interim versus long-term. It's going to take some time to walk through, work with our communities, work with our residents, and kind of develop the maps, make sure they're right for each community, bring them to the ERB. It's going to take time to go through all that, and then the ERB, NRB has that tier 3 rulemaking. Like that's not defined yet. It's got some resources connected to it that maybe I hope you take a look at that when that gets to your table. So I don't think it's not a yes, no, there's kind of gray area. Like set up some structure, then let us start working with our communities and the public to put the things in place to be consistent with that structure.
Cool.
And I think that is when you actually start looking at 687, who knows when it will come over. I don't know.
2 weeks maybe.
That sounds realistic. I think a lot of what is in there is process. It's kind of how do the regional planning commissions make sure our plans are consistent with each other across the state so that there's kind of consistent decision making. How does the ERB look or NRB look at that consistently? How does it apply to designation programs? So that's most of 687 is process. At this point, I think some of the things that were like laid down earlier have been backed up to let's go through the planning or the rulemaking to figure it out the detail. But I think the structure is there. That's good. And that's really what we're talking about when I make that comment.
It's similar in a way to the work we've been doing on urban corridors. Vendors,
Yeah.
mapping phase, public engagement phase, outreach and education phase, rulemaking phase, and then full on implementation. But there's a lot of data gathering and conversations to make sure that the concepts, once they're starting to be expressed in mass, so get ground truth.
Yeah, and we've been doing regional plans for a long time now, right? The legislature's required us to do 30 years maybe. We'll sit here for all that, but it's been a while. And so, you know, doing the regional planning process isn't new, but putting more importance on those maps, that is really new. And so that is going to require, and just by the function of it, is going to have more people interested in weighing in on those maps, and we'll need to spend more time making sure they're right before getting them done. So, thank you.
Been learning that maps are political and using them. But spend my time last time you guys was just
Back. We're upstream, right here. And you've come to upstream to get some rules changed, some laws changed. And one of the things that I keep asking about is sewer systems and how they work. And expectations of enforcement, that sort of stuff. This bill would authorize the construction of many more dwellings in areas that have, did you refer to as operating sewer systems?
Water and sewer systems.
Okay. And we have sewer systems that discharge raw sewage into streams periodically, over and over and over again. And we are upstream being asked to say, we'll take care of that later. Now we want to build new housing and use sewer systems that are putting raw sewage in streams. How do we assure the public that what will be done later will be done on some sort of schedule? At the same time, we're permitting a sweeping increase of abilities of people to discharge raw sewage into streams as part of our housing plan, because it's less expensive to discharge raw sewer into streams.
I'm not an expert in this, but to my understanding, that's my understanding, all those handful of sewer systems that do have combined sewer overflows, right? It's big rain events that cause those overflows, right?
Yeah.
So
it's not
to be clear.
That thing on the right on the interstate highway that is causing those events. It's big rain events. So
yeah, but I say that to say I think no municipality is intentionally trying to discharge sewage into our streams. It's the big rain events, and they have a combined stormwater and wastewater system that overflows it. To my knowledge, they have permits with DEC, and they are all under some sort of regulatory scheme and permit and schedule, and are all investing in addressing those issues. So I think that's a DEC question to figure out how those are being addressed. But that is certainly
DEC is asking upstream to authorize that for a greater level of pollution. And
I don't think there's an intent for a greater level of pollution. Certainly in this area,
anyway.
no, we're under the EPA's total maximum daily load requirements, right? We're reducing the amount of phosphorus every year. I'm sure you got the water quality report.
We are
from TEC.
discharging raw sewage into streams, whether it's intentional or accidental or has happened through dereliction for what is going on now, is different from the request to expand upon that accident, that delinquents, that dereliction with no end in sight. That's what we're being asked to do.
I can't agree that that's what I'm asking.
Good, then if you don't
No,
agree with it, we'll take it out of the bill.
Because every project that I've seen, so let me talk about the south end of Burlington, because that's a place I'm familiar, a little bit familiar with, where they do have a CSO issue in that part of the city. And there's a large developer who's interested in doing housing development there. You may have heard something about it. It's been in the news a little bit, but they are working diligently. We've been funding a bunch of the work at the front end to figure out how to reduce the amount. So I believe every single project that's happening is going to actually reduce the CSO issue, not make it worse.
Senator McCormick, my friend, is looking at me saying that I'm losing my composure.
Yeah, no, I don't know. No, exactly. That's I think we're all concerned with the environmental water quality. I don't want to see the beaches in Burlington get closed, right? That's I live, that's where I live. So it's an issue. I'm not disagreeing it's an issue, but I am disagreeing with the notion that we're trying to make it worse and nobody's working on it.
You're not. If I were sitting in chair, I certainly would say I'm trying to make it worse.
No,
we're saying, yeah, it's gonna get worse, but that's not our problem. That's someone else's problem. We wish to discharge, to follow a policy, which we all know will further and increase the pollution in our streams, and we are unwilling to tackle it.
I don't agree that we're making it worse. My experience has been that we're making it better with these investments in our in those communities with sewers. Definitely. But thank you for bringing that.
Yeah. So we're gonna on that remote you can raise
It resolved on a major court.
It resolved.
On a major.
We're a little bit tense, and then sit you down. Okay. Good morning.
That brings all.
Now we know we're not making it worse. We have another witness.
Thanks, Ted Brady from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Nice to see everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking us for our opinion about 311 and about changes to Act 250 that would impact the ability to house all the people that can't find housing right now and help our towns be more vital and functioning and wonderful places to live.
Mr. Baker, can I ask a quick question? Yeah. Mr. Baker was talking about, he has been monitoring, participating in whatever 687. So we know we're going to see other proposals come in. And I don't know if, in speaking right now in 311, if you are also conversant what's going on in 687 so that you can sort of preview things that you think are not 311, but that are going to be leaning on our plate and other discussion.
Say a conversant, 200-page bill that changes every 24 hours would be inaccurate, but I'm following it as best I can.
Okay.
You would have some of my comments tied to both, and I'd love to answer any questions that can hopefully preview our concerns or our excitement.
Yeah, great. I mean, we know it's going to be an iterative process. We'll be going around this block. Okay.
Yeah, so absolutely, but happy to try to tie that together.
Thank you.
So big picture on 311 though, and really on the House bill that's coming your way. We want to talk about the provisions that impact municipalities and recognize that I can't talk to a lot of this bill because it's about giving housing money to housing projects that is kind of outside of my wheelhouse. But I do want to address our shortage, our housing shortage, and recognize that it can't be rested on the shoulders of municipalities, which last year, the bill that went through largely did. S100 was really about, Act 47 really about changing the way municipalities do their business and saying that that's going to solve our housing crisis. And that's not a solution. In order to fix this, it needs to be a state, local, and federal solution. So appreciate that this bill really looks like the other part of that, the state side. If only the feds would give us more, we then have a functioning partnership with all three of us. So what I'm talking about today is not my opinion. I really want to clear that up. I can actually talk to some things that my membership, all 247 towns voted on. As our municipal policy, we adopt it every 2 years before the session starts. And some of the things in 311 directly address issues that my membership showed up and voted on and built over a really big process. So this is not my opinion. One of the core principles of that policy is that local discretion to pursue sustainable housing and economic development, recovery, and resilience is needed. And I think this bill could do that and could enable municipalities new tools to do exactly that. It's especially important, as I said, because last year we focused on municipal. So related to Act 250, it's what our policy calls for. I think you're going to hear it mirrored in the bill you have before you. Allowing municipalities to newly adopted local and zoning regulations to accept responsibility to administer Act 250 in their own jurisdiction. It still doesn't exactly do that, but there are provisions of it that hold the spirit of that. Eliminating Act 250 jurisdiction designated growth centers, downtowns, new town centers, designated centers, neighborhood development areas, and other areas that are designated municipal plans. This bill does that. You know, by it calls it something different, but that does it. Defining regional impact in Act 250 to mean a measurable effect on areas outside the borders of the city. A few other issues here that we call an Act 250. I don't think to go over to waste your time. And I have provided my testimony that you. I want to specifically talk to a couple of sections of the bill. Sections 24 and 26, which establish the three-tier designation system and Act 250 exemptions. They effectively realized the things I just mentioned. We support the language in the bill that does this, those sections, and the benefits that they align that they give each section. When Charlie was talking about Tier 1A and Tier 1B, are really appreciated. I think they're appropriate. I also want to point out key thing here is the reason we support this is because in those places there is municipal zoning and planning that's occurring. So you're not just doing away with zoning and planning. Somebody's still doing a check and balance on the development of housing. They don't develop anything when it comes out of Act 250. There's one area that I'm a little concerned about in those sections, and that's section 24B1. That requires municipalities to apply for approval from a regional planning commission before it goes to the board. And this is a call out that the relationship between municipalities and RPCs is meant to be really a functional technical assistance partnership. It is. And it's one of the most important relationships the town has to realize their vision for their communities. This provision might accidentally create regulatory relationships. And so we'd ask that just change the language in section 24B1 to remove the word and approval, recognizing that an RPC is going to help a town put together its application. And they're going to either say it does or doesn't align with the regional plan, but it should be up to the board to make that decision. And later in the bill, you folks, the bill gives the RPCs the ability to weigh in at another point too with the board. So just want to highlight that one.
Thank you. Could you also imagine that maybe there's a different entity that they could apply to for comment and approval?
I hope that the board ultimately is the environmental board, whatever we're calling this thing, is the one that makes the final decision.
Right.
And the RPC is going to have an opinion, right? But there's a difference between having an opinion and approving something. That's all.
So as it's envisioned right now, it's not that. Sorry, we haven't gotten to this part of the bill yet, but as it's written now, the board would still need to approve it. So as it's written, it's sort of like it needs to be approved twice.
Yep.
Okay.
So hoping they can just remove that, make it clear. I think based on other language that the intent is actually that the regional planning commission's going to sit down and work with them on the application. Then the RPC is going to opine if they've done their job well. It's going to go to the board, and the board would obviously take the RPC's opinion into consideration.
Thank you.
So then, so big picture, really appreciate what we're doing here and think that it meets a couple of our key visions. Several provisions of the bill, though, still go back to preempting local zoning issues. So I just want to remind the committee that several of the things you probably heard about in this building this year are not because housing issues are not because municipal bodies didn't want housing, it's because of the appeals process. And so when you look at, maybe you've heard of Woodstock, people are using Woodstock as an example where the town got in the way, or they're using, I lost my spot on my page.
What you're referring to, what's that?
Yeah, so they, they were proposing to build some housing in Woodstock, the town had actually changed, affordable housing, the town had changed the zoning bylaws to allow for higher density and more units, and somebody came in, and appealed the project. So it wasn't the town saying, we don't want this, it was the appeals process saying, we know how to slow this down and stop this housing from happening. So Democratic elected folks, Democratic process says we want this much housing here. And the appeals process allows people to say, oh, wait a second, we have a different opinion. And we appreciate that in this bill, there is let's see if I can get section 18, it increases the threshold of appeals of municipal permits from 10 people to 3% to 25 people. We still think that's too low, but it's better than 10. And that's where we see a lot of the problems. It's the appeals process that's stopping these projects. Our towns are trying to modernize their bylaws. I think Chris can talk to it, Alex can talk to it. Sorry, the commission talk to the fact that I think 100 or more towns will apply to municipal bylaws update grants. Towns are trying to do that. There are other provisions in the bill that talk about local control that I did want to highlight. Or preempting local zoning issues. Section 10 would have the effect of more than doubling the aggressive upzoning done just last year. So section 10 allows for so many units per 1/3 of an acre, with a new 12 unit per acre minimum anywhere there's water and sewer. Last year you passed a bill that had a 5 unit per acre minimum. So effectively doubling the density the town has to require. Going back to the idea of saying Act 250 shouldn't be looking at 75 units in tier 1B or anything in tier 1A, it's because the town has a zoning process that puts a check and balance, that tries to balance the interests of the landowner with the common interests of the people that live next door.
I think we heard yesterday that you give a density of 5 units per acre, and then you're gonna subdivide, even if you could end up with 5 times go to multi units, you can end up with 5 times 4. So very different density than what a regular neighborhood might expect in one spot. Could be a great idea. I'm just saying, we want to revisit that math, make sure we understand what the full implications are.
And I think this is here because people don't understand what the implications are of last year's bill. So I do appreciate that. I think it needs to be revisited and say, what are we trying to do? And talk to some planners about what they think it does. Because I think different planners have different opinions about what the existing law is and what this would do. Section 11 would allow any hotel and motel to be converted to a permanent housing unit.
Of course.
Imagine, again, turning a 50-unit hotel into a 50-unit housing complex has implications for a community. And it may increase school enrollment, it may increase the need for transit services, sewer and water consumption, the need for recreational infrastructure. Hotel guests don't need parks and t-ball coaches. Communities have first-hand experience with these preemptions and unintended consequences. Think short-term rentals.
Yeah.
The short-term rental market has drastically changed, and towns have largely been unable to get a hold of that. The second good example of that is in the pandemic, we decided to turn our hotels into homeless shelters. And places like Colchester and Rutland City were dealing suddenly with 300 high needs individuals with absolutely no support services, and their public safety budgets skyrocketed. So this will have an unintended consequence. And it may be appropriate in some places and it wouldn't in others. That's why you have a town zoning process. Don't worry, there's only 2 more. I know why.
Do we look worried?
Yeah, the people at the table are not worried.
Yeah. People at home.
We have a high pain threshold in here, so we just keep going.
So then section 12 further regulates the municipality's ability to regulate parking. Act 47 addressed limiting municipalities' ability to set certain parking spot requirements. The bill would require towns to acknowledge tandem parking as enough parking spots.
It's tandem parking.
Back to back, single file. It also doesn't require that it's only two, it could be 10 cars in a row. And imagine a bunch of college people unrelated, juggling those cars, things like that. There are some unintended consequences when you do things like this.
It's parallel parking like in a driveway is what you're describing?
Not parallel, we're talking like you're gonna move one car to get another car out. So imagine a
no
single
fine.
file line. It would require towns to allow for tandem parking. The county orders there.
Yeah, I guess I've only seen that in a valet situation. Other than my UVM days, but
Yeah.
that I don't think anyone was permitting anything.
So again, it works some places, it doesn't work others. Also has provisions in here about smaller parking spots. Works in some places, doesn't work in others.
Is it, no. I've seen in towns when, homes get divided into multi-unit dwellings, but they have a small driveway that really holds one car, or maybe two, and fine. And then because that's not a convenient way to go in and out, especially if it's two different owners of the cars, lawns just become parking lots. And I don't know if that's like, I'm raising this concern, it's just an aesthetic concern, I should be quiet, or that's something that towns are concerned about and have ways to deal with, and they should be able to deal with it.
Through the municipal zoning process, when you try to convert your home from 1 unit to 8 units, you go through a process that should require parking consideration in many towns. Not all, and this bill would say you really can't tell them that they can't have in this case, I think it's 4 or 5 units depending where you live. No matter what your parking situation, if you have tandem parking. So yes, towns are absolutely concerned. And people complain about 3 things in towns.
Yeah.
Cars, pets, and their kids in that order.
Yeah.
And people complain about where cars are parked. And towns try through the zoning process to tell people they can have more cars there than they have, bedrooms or units. This bill would absolutely restrict the town's ability to do that. Finally, section 17. It sets a timeline on appropriate municipal panels conducting land use reviews that will have unintended consequences, likely resulting in more denials. They changed the requirement right now, which is 45 days from the adjournment of the DRB or planning commission hearing. 45 days from then, you have to issue a decision. This changes it from 180 days from the submission of an application. What are the impacts of that? A lot of these hearings get stretched out because the town and the developer are trying to make something work. Things get stretched out because they're volunteer boards that work in their smaller towns that require quorums and require so many days notice. We recognize that 180 days doesn't sound like a lot. And it's not a lot for a lot of towns. And so we're thinking maybe adding a population threshold that says for towns less than 5,000 or come up with a number. They perhaps stick to the existing block, but towns of a certain size have to stick to this 180-day block. So we support this if it was just changed to recognize that smallest towns have different problems.
I apologize, I have yet to really wrap my head around this. So smaller towns would prefer which version?
I think smaller towns are okay with the existing one.
Okay.
Which requires them to issue a decision 45 days after the adjournment of the hearing. The change, I think, 180 days is a lot of time, but I still think some of our smallest towns might have an issue with that trying to do right. And I don't think our smallest towns are the places where this is the problem, but. Hey, that's about it. I appreciate the committee's efforts and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from Spring?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the, I would say like threads of this conversation has been how some towns do planning and zoning right some towns do planning and zoning wrong, like they're just kind of this, some, or at least it feels like that's part of the conversation. And the idea of the Woodstocks or the Norwiches in our district who are limiting the development of affordable housing compared to other communities who might be more open door policy to the conversation of affordable housing or just actually building in their communities. I'm wondering, do you have a sense, is there a way to meet the needs of kind of both of those styles of community? Or are we just going to be in a situation where we're either going to make the communities that have that tighter zoning, who have been limiting affordable housing, disappointed? And I guess I'm just wondering, you deal with a lot of different towns with a lot of different preferences, and how does that factor into your discussion with the bill?
Yeah, well, most importantly, going back to the Act 50 exemptions, the places that are going to be exempted are the places that are appropriate to build housing. And those places are going to see an increase in development and desire for development in those places. And so their local zoning, is going to be the last thing that stops or allows citizens to weigh in with that. And I think the legislature pretty much took away their ability to stop high density housing from happening last year. So we don't see that as a big problem. The bigger problem in our mind is there are not the systems in place to help a town go from being concerned about large housing developments to being comfortable with it. And that means investment in water and sewer, it means investment in mass transit, it means investment in social services. You know, if you're a town that has a constable, a part-time constable, and a part-time zoning officer, and no water and wastewater, you can't imagine a world where you say yes to a 50-unit housing development.
Exactly.
So I think that's the bigger obstacle to those communities.
So it's less of how they've developed their planning and zoning and more that they just don't have the capacity or ability to take on that number of units in their community without having other resources available to them. That's
my observation. I think there are absolutely places that are trying to maintain a certain aesthetic or something in a portion of their town. And I think you can have it both ways, honestly. I mean, you can maintain the aesthetic while creating some modern housing. I don't think most towns are afraid of that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
I have a quick question about when the right to duplex, stuff like that. I mean, I haven't heard any data about how useful that's been. It strikes me from away from the legislature that you can much more rapidly duplex a place than you can build a new place from scratch, and also much more economic. So I don't know how that's playing out. If you're hearing anecdotally or you're surveying your towns that there's a lot of that going on and it's actually making a positive contribution, or it's sort of was an idea that really hasn't caught on.
Yeah, I'd look to the mayor and to Chris and Alex to answer that one on data, because what I see is in most of our towns, that's benefiting people that want to create a short-term rental.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or duplexing and ADUs are a great way to create some additional income. That's what we're hearing from our resort towns. And I will know that across the country, there's only 2 or 3 other places that have a duplex by right or ADU by right. A lot of cities have it, but very few states. So I don't know that there's a lot of data out there yet that says that this is like an effective housing strategy. I don't know.
Might be effective at creating housing for someone, but not for residents. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I just shared my personal opinions. I don't know.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's fine.
Parking. We're assuming, I want to connect what we're doing here with other efforts that are happening elsewhere. People often talk about the left hand not going with the right hand going. While we're talking about adequate parking, but there is an initiative as well to have less reliance on individual travel automobiles and more on mass transit. Your assumption the unstated assumption that I'm hearing is that we're not gonna do that. That we're gonna stick with the private cars.
So we participated in the mass transit study this summer about funding for mass transit, increasing the local share. We spend something like 13 times more than anybody else on mass transit per capita in the country. I do have skepticism that we're ever going to create a system that adequately requires every, even designated center or village center, to have enough mass transit that you don't need a car in the near future. A great goal, and I support it, but I don't think we can abandon the requirements for parking because everywhere's not Burlington. Everyone doesn't have that mass transit yet, and we're supportive and trying to find new ways to fund it. But right now, I don't see that happening in the next 5 to 10 years.
We look nice for a while.
I think it's a great goal and we should continue working towards it. But we fully support our towns complain about not having it transit every day.
Micro transit.
Well, and development I live in Wrinkle Village, so you can literally really live there and not get in a car for 5 days because you can't walk there. Yeah. But that's the first time in my life, and I lived in Burlington a long time ago. Okay, but first time in 40 years, I didn't have a car.
But I think this bill is going to increase transit-friendly development. You're going to concentrate development. All these Act 250 exemptions are going to concentrate development the place we want it, create more opportunity for mass transit.
And that brings us to the next thing I wanted to address, which is the idea of exemptions. There's no question that if someone wants to do a development, and they got to deal with Act 50, that's something they got to deal with. Anything you have to deal with is going to slow you down. But that is anything. Finding a contractor is going to slow you down. Getting credit is going to slow you down. Okay. The assumption is that a lot of these things that slow you down, you have to do. Are you suggesting, and not just you, I mean just the whole initiative towards exemption, that there is no benefit derived from Act 250 reviews, or that the benefit isn't worth it, or
my opinion is the benefit to Act 250 does not actually exist in a limited number of places where there's adequate municipal planning and zoning, where there's historic development, and that Act 250 does not add anything to the process in certain places. That is not a statewide statement. It is designated places that we're going to map and we're going to say this place is not benefited from Act 250 because there's adequate municipal planning and zoning. There's historic development patterns that we want to continue encouraging. So no, I do not say that Act 250 is worthless. There are places, like the chair said, that depend on Act 250 as their only check and balance, right? And I recognize that. I see that in our towns. I hear planning commission members tell me that from our small 1-acre towns.
there is provision in the law that the municipality can get an Act 250 permit rather than an exemption. Just get the permit. And then like an umbrella permit, as you could do with an industrial park.
For master planning.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm familiar with the master planning concept. I don't know how often that's used. My time at ACCD, I don't remember it being invoked all that much.
My understanding is it's not used well. So I'm unfortunate. One would just they would use it.
Yeah, my understanding also was it cost a lot. And the process that even if you made a small change, you have to go back and get change. But yeah, I'm familiar with.
Well, no, that was the idea, is that the small change is that a particular development in a designated area would be treated as a small change, be treated as an amendment to an existing permit rather than a whole process.
Go back, I don't think Act 250 is adding value to a limited number of geographic places. And I think we could easily map those out, and I think this bill would do that. So it doesn't add value here, but it adds tremendous value in other places.
Part of what when we talk about master permits, some of the hesitation was that instead of it being the developer going to Act 250, it became the municipality going Act 250. So it was fronting money to do that level of planning. sort of on behalf of developers who then develop in the space covered by the permit. So it seems as though municipalities didn't really want to be in that business of permitting for other. Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna check in. We have potentially a team coming up, or I don't know if we're gonna have people go in individual order, but we're looking at time. We have 35 minutes and 3 people. So if that's gonna be too little time, I apologize that we're gonna be running short, and we will certainly be scheduled.
I can be quick, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna rush anyone. I just wanna, from the air traffic control tower, make sure that we don't have anyone running out of time, or if we're gonna run short, we just acknowledge it and do more tomorrow.
So if it's okay, Mr. Chair, I'll lead off and then I'll pass it to Jacob and Chris. So for the record, Alex Farrell, Commissioner at the Department of Housing and Community Development. You've noticed I've been sitting through you, so I've been able to follow along with your discussions and keep track of what some of the questions were. So I've tried to incorporate those in my comments today. I know one of the things that came up that folks were asking Ledge Council for was, what did we do last year in the Home Act? Where does that overlap or not overlap with what's being proposed in S311? I'm sorry that I didn't get this to you sooner, but I'm going to pass this out. Might write a couple of these down. I have sent it to be posted. Here, Senator. And we won't dive into this quite yet. We might just set this aside for a moment, but as Charlie was saying, you know, it takes a moment to stop and visualize. Okay, where is this saying there'd be a temporary full exemption? Where is this saying there'd be a temporary cap increase? Versus, okay, where is this saying we're not touching it? So we can dive back into this later, or you can just have this for your own visualization.
Well, thank you for pulling that information together for us.
Sorry. Happy to. So I do want to start off by just thanking the committee for how much time is being dedicated to this bill this week, and that sounds like next week as well. You're planning on diving into this, so really appreciate that. You've had a lot of really good discussion here. So
it's a priority for us.
I appreciate that.
That is perfect.
Thank you for that. Well, you know, I'm going to echo a lot of the comments you've heard from Senator Ron Hinsdale yesterday, and some of the folks that have been up here today. And you know, one of those things is drawing a distinction between the broader land use discussions that are going on with the future land use mapping and all that. Understanding that's sort of the mid to long term discussion. Setting that aside, we're also looking at what are housing solutions, particularly in the short term, but also some programmatic levers that we're pulling here are still focused on the long term. And this bill being a housing bill, obviously there's a lot of discussion here around the interim Act 250 exemptions, but as has been pointed out, it's a broad package and all of them have to work together in order to make sure that we're actually seeing the change we want in the way that we want. So I think quickly, well, before I say that, I do want to say the way those two things interact, the interim exemptions in here and the longer term land use exemptions. Charlie referred to an off ramp from the interim exemptions. That's sort of, I was seeing the interim exemptions are the on ramp to the longer term, but I think we're thinking along the same lines. There's a ramp. You're not sure. So yeah, we're getting somewhere with these. So we see them as mutually inclusive, certainly not mutually exclusive. Before we dive into the interim exemptions, I do want to just quickly touch on a little bit of data. I know there's sort of a common understanding, as I've heard you all already say, there's common understanding that there's a shortage of housing. I'll put it in the context of vacancy rates. Senator Ron Hinsdale alluded to the scarcity that we're seeing, and vacancy rates is one way that we measure availability of housing units. Statewide, we're seeing just over 1% owned vacancy rates on the ownership side, and then just around 3% rental vacancy rates. For reference, we'd rather see that ownership vacancy rate more closer to 3%, and that rental vacancy rate at least at 5%. That's generally what's considered a healthy market. So what that would represent in terms of just a point in time discrepancy is about 6,700, 6,800 units conservatively. The reason I say conservatively, these vacancy rates are determined by US Census Bureau surveys, and we tend to know there's a margin of error that oftentimes when you compare to direct surveys, the US Census Bureau estimates tend to go higher. So it's actually vacancy rates are even tighter than what we see in the Census Bureau data, but it's the best data we have on a statewide basis. So
6,800 units overall, or this is like
that's right. So statewide, that would be a point in time, not accounting for future growth, not accounting for anything that just as healthy rates.
We only remember, it seems like last year we were talking about like 20,000 and 40,000. What can you, so these are really different numbers. Can you help me understand what 6,800
Yeah,
represents compared to what 20,000 or 40,000?
absolutely. So two, I'd say distinctly different references.
Okay.
6,800 is, and I say point in time intentionally, that's right this moment, how many units can we bring online with the current population, current demographics to get us to healthy vacancy rates at this moment, but that's not looking in the future at all. So that's not accounting for workforce growth needs or expected population growth or even demographic shifts. That's just taking things as they are at this moment. If we can wave a wand and tomorrow have better vacancy rates, that's how many units. So
does the department have a sense of however many we were talking about duplexing by right, and that these are they're turning into short-term rentals rather than permanent housing?
yeah.
Do you have a sense of the proportion of new units being created in Vermont that are not addressing our housing shortage, but are just creating new opportunities for someone, not at all against this, but someone to come visit and stay in some place? So we're creating, in essence, something comparable to like hotel rooms.
Yeah.
We're not creating housing.
Yeah, I think you're hearing from Maura Collins tomorrow. Maura may be a better source of that, in part because I'll take the opportunity to share the plug housingdata.org. It's a very specific housing data website. Highly recommend people jump into it. That's where I can get quick access to a lot of data, such as building permit data. I know how many units we're constructing based on building permits statewide, by county, by town. I can also look at short-term rentals, and so Senator Ron Hinsdale made an astute comment yesterday that there's a handful of communities in which short-term rentals are really impacting the number of units that are going to that versus longer term. And I think Lamoille County is the hot spot. The Stowe area is really where it's most acutely felt. Statewide, short-term rentals is a portion of the housing stock's about 3%. So obviously in some areas like Lamoille, where that's more like 13%, it's more acutely felt. But places like Chittenden County, it's actually only about 1% of the total housing stock. So I can't tell you as far as the new units duplexing, but I can give you a broader sense of where we're at.
Sure. I don't know if this bill addresses that sort of siphoning off housing developed that doesn't help current residents. And there, I don't read a provision that's oriented to addressing that, or we just say, hey, that's the market and the market operates.
Yeah, and I need to, and I will ask for forgiveness that I'm not entirely familiar with. I know there is a section that references short-term rentals that I need to take another look. And I think that's
I don't want to
safety
say it
standards.
towards other. I'm just flagging it.
Yes.
For being mindful of it, keep working.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. But no, I mean, I think those are all really good reference points to get a sense of the scale of what we're looking at. I mean, even if I think one way we like to put it is, let's say we are looking at VHFA's estimates last year were, and I'm just going to shift the years out, 30 to 40,000 over, call it 10 years, is what would be needed. And so even if you were to take, say, all 8 to 12,000 short-term rentals, and of those which would be suitable for long-term rental or habitation, which might not be any, that might solve a portion of the problem, but it'd be a fairly small portion of the broader problem. But it shouldn't be dismissed. I think it is a very relevant part of the conversation. So, you know, part of this, and part of the reason that we're looking at land use zoning, as well as investments into some of these housing programs, is because we know that we've underbuilt, especially in the last couple of decades. If you look at a chart, and I've got one here, and I can send it around afterward, that just shows building permits over time. And the 1980s is really the last time we were building at a healthy pace. If memory serves me, it was, we were building around, on average, 4,900 units a year in the 1980s. And it tapers off pretty sharply, especially as we hit the mid-2000s. And so what we're suffering from now is sort of a lagging effect of lack of construction, home building. And so the data now shows that the people that have suffered the most as a result of that, the scarcity that has led to these low vacancy rates, that has led to this older housing stock. The people that suffer the most are low income folks, low income Vermonters, and BIPOC community. I will repeat the reference that Charlie made earlier to the disparity between white ownership rates and black ownership rates. That's a 50-point spread. And it actually, from 2011 to 2022, black home ownership rates actually decreased. Now there's a lot of different ways to look at that data. I think we would hope that in part that's because we're becoming a more diverse state. In parts of the state we are, in parts of the state we aren't. But I think it's still something we really need to be concerned about, that BIPOC Vermonters aren't having the same home ownership opportunities as white Vermonters, particularly white Vermonters that have been here for a longer period of time. So I think just coming back to the tools that are included in this and that we're looking to implement to solve this issue. One of the tools that I'm just going to shamelessly plug, that I want to thank the CP&R team that's here, the Homes for All toolkit. So this is a toolkit that walks one through how you build, say, gentle infill. So picture a 1 to 4 unit, could even be an ADU, but small scale development. And I think this is what a lot of people would picture in a Vermont community. And the reason is because it was based on pilot surveys within 5 Vermont communities. These folks can dive into it more. But the reason I bring that up is because adding density and having requiring higher density in certain areas in our communities allows for this type of development where it's not necessarily changing the look and feel of a community, but it's adding a significant number of housing units.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
Could you leave that copy with the committee? So
For a small fee. Yes.
But the fee will go towards municipal planning grants.
or CSO works.
Yeah. That's right. But to touch, I guess, to bring that back to Act 250, and I just want to clarify, what you'd see in here is the type of development that most likely would not trigger Act 250. There are certain situations in which it might. Let's say you were to do a number of these in scattered site within, say, under current law within 5 miles. It wouldn't be a noticeable amount, but it could trigger Act 250 and would discourage that. And in fact, during one of the panels of small scale developers, essentially all 4 developers up there, again, building at a very small scale, said to Charlie's point earlier, yeah, we just build to stay right under that threshold. So it's hard to prove a negative. So we don't know how many units they would have created, as you were asking before, if they weren't trying to stay under that trigger, because they're not submitting an application for what they would love to do. They're looking at it ahead of time and saying, all right, well, this is what I'm going to do.
How many of the people on the panel, how many units did they say that they would have built?
So in one case, Zach Hale, who you may or may not be inviting to speak, he was talking about some scattered site development. In this case, they just stayed at 9. And then with the temporary home act exemption, they were able to go up. I don't know if he ended up going up to 24 or they just had a particular project that suited his needs at 20 something, but he was able to make these various scattered site efforts work now because it went from 10 to 25. So
I guess it's just not that compelling. Like, it's just not that compelling to be like, I don't want to go through a permitting process, so I'm gonna build fewer houses. Like, it just doesn't feel like the amount of money and the time don't seem extreme enough for me to understand.
I think
So how many developers are you talking to? Are these big developers?
these are all very small developers, very small scale.
And what is that term, when you say small developers, who are you talking about? Like, how many houses are we talking?
Yeah, so I mean, one of them was Joan Richard, who he's in Fairleigh and has built.
I've heard his name quite a bit.
One of them, an 8 unit right?
Yeah, I know this exact, so I've heard that example many times.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, all I can say is we just see how the market reacts, I guess, and to Charlie's point earlier. The evidence that we see that shows us people stay just under the trigger is the number of 9-unit developments that we see. And Charlie's right, I mean, the market will react, whether or not developers fully understand or you know, have gone through Act 250 before.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, but what I can say is they are reacting to it, and so I know that changing the caps, and I think the acknowledgement that priority housing projects is sort of a value. I've heard this committee discuss quite a bit to see a lot of value in priority housing projects. I think the underlying logic of that is that not going through the Act 250 project is a very strong incentive. So if we're all going to accept that in that argument, we have to also accept that not hitting Act 250 is a pretty strong incentive for developers.
Yeah, and I think foundationally, I have two problems with that statement. One, it hasn't been confirmed to me logically why it would be such a great barrier, why you would avoid it. That I haven't heard. I mean, and I'm happy to be persuaded. This is the same conversation we had with the homes bill.
Yeah.
So there was good data we got last time. Maybe I need to see that again to understand it. And then the second point that confuses me is they're making money off this. Are people not making money off this development? Is that where I'm misunderstanding? Because the affordable housing developers and a lot of our larger developers who are working in that space are going through a lot of the permitting processes.
So I respond to two comments. The first being, I think talking to a lot of developers is your best bet. Having them in here, they can better address why they avoid Act 250. And someone like Evernorth, who is used to handling large projects, they might not necessarily have a problem going through certain larger permitting, but a lot of the smaller scale developers are clearly trying to avoid it. They are better equipped to answer that. The other point, they're making money. I think one of the problems right now is that there's a lot of housing development that does not pencil out.
Oh, okay, yep.
And so that is one of the factors that's inhibiting housing creation. And I think that kind of brings me to the next important point, which I've heard discussing here a lot, which is the distinction between big A, affordable housing, and small a, affordable. Big A being there's some sort of a subsidy, whether it's a housing choice voucher for rental, or perhaps it's there's state investment or federal investment. So it's capping the rates that we can charge. And those are sources, you know, in part invested in here, but that come from the federal government, come from the state, and are ongoing. And so that's one way that we encourage this sort of small scale, the big A affordable housing. And then there's the small A affordable, and that's what I think we're really not seeing a lot of, which is where there's significant scale. And so you're able to, on a larger scale, build your, or push your per unit cost down by mitigating that fixed cost spread over a large number of units. So I guess to come back to it,
yeah, why do you make your case?
The developers are avoiding Act 250. I think that is a given. And so just knowing that's the environment we're operating in, when folks are forced to keep the unit count down, the way to make a pencil project out, let's say with a 9-unit development, is by building what I've referred to in here as McMansions. Because you're either going to make it pencil out on price or volume, right? So if you're allowed to build to broader scale, well, you can make up for that on volume rather than price. But if you have to keep it to 9 units, you're going to do it on price.
I understand what you're saying.
So I hope that answered the question. I realize it didn't get to the heart of why aren't developers going through Act 250, but knowing the market is what it is, that is what's happening.
A quick question on priority housing projects. So those provisions are removed from the statute by 311. Do you have any thoughts on retaining or seeing them depart?
I keep them in, and I think Charlie's suggestion earlier is really good, because and I think I understand the logic of removing them in the first place was just, oh, well, under these interim exemptions, they're moved, right? However, understanding their interim exemptions, PHPs will still play a role down the road. So I think keep them in there, they'll still play an important role. The second point I'll make there is, even in the interim, if people still wanted PHPs to play a role, you could broaden the space in which PHPs could become relevant. I realize that's not necessarily probably what you're interested in looking at, but you know, in the areas where there's a different exemption for areas certified municipal water and sewer where it's not a full exemption, perhaps you could broaden geographically PHPs to that boundary, and then you could get the full exemption if you're a PHP there, but outside of the designated area. I will make one. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. I have a question that I'm gonna focus on. I'm gonna hold my question.
Okay.
Okay, so it's an end kind of question.
Like a bus.
It's just a bus.
And I will also just pass around, you know, Charlie made some comments about possible adjustments to language. I know, on page 6 in section 3, lines 1 through 5, so that's subsection BG. I'll pass this around. Here we go, Senator, if you don't mind, pass that down. You know, this is a possible way to adjust that language. This is a full exemption language. Oh, there's another copy here. And I think there was just some mix-ups with the language here. I chatted with Senator Ron Hinsdale. Sounds like their intent was, per the chart that I handed out earlier, the full exemption would be for all municipalities. I think the intent was for village headquarters, zoning and water and wastewater. And then that buffer the half mile around downtown, quarter mile around village centers. So, you know, on here it's just a recommended change to clean up some of the language, where I think it was just some mix-ups. And then down below is how you could possibly narrow and clarify that a little bit more, along the lines of what I think I've heard discussed here. But Charlie also spoke to that, and I think has some additional comments around river corridors, which I think are also appropriate consideration for that. I think that's the bulk of what I wanted to cover, but happy to.
Any or I don't want.
Thank you. This chart is very helpful, and especially related to the question before about, is it an on-ramp or an off-ramp, right? Like, well, whatever it is. And don't know if this is anything I can add for, but I appreciate that we've got the Home Act, like what we passed, and then what was here for the interim, like the temporary exemptions.
Yeah.
And then at some point, and I'll just put this out to the universe, it doesn't have to be you, particularly, but being able to compare that to whatever the long-term exemptions land on. I know that we're not there, and so it would not make sense to have that chart right now because it changes every 24 hours or whatever, right? And so, but just, you know, once that's here, to have that whole transition to be visually available is, I think, would be great. So
Charlie would be happy to do that.
perfect.
You should be asking for. Well, and I would add, I'm still interested in the column before the Home Act. So if we saw where we were when we started moving.
Oh, sure.
And what we're talking about now, and then even further. I mean, there's an arc to all these things, and it's hard to see and appreciate the arc when you're looking at sub BB and sub G and sub F.2. There are little pieces all over the place, and they're so some people may grasp it immediately, but I would find it terrible.
Yes.
You might be the right person to ask this question of. If you are not, then, you know, just say so. But one of the things that I have been just tuning into is we call them.
It's a map.
No. Okay, this is from Ellen's presentation about Act 50 for us, like last year. But criteria 1 through 9 or 10, 1 through 10, and so Okay, my question is. Like I feel like I see how the limiting the exemptions to places with water and sewer. Would satisfy some of the criteria. That's great. My question is about, like, let's say somebody was to propose a development in a wetland, right? We just had a vote on the floor yesterday about that, but those rules won't take effect for some time. What measures might we be relying on here with these exemptions that would prevent someone from just building in a wetland?
So I defer to A&R, but the short answer is I believe there'd be other wetland permits that would have to be sought.
To find other.
Okay,
plans.
okay, and that's,
Yeah.
That's
right, yes, that's very helpful, because I'm still learning, and so I appreciate that. If there's, okay, thank you, I think that actually answers my question.
Yeah, wetlands and river corridors, there are substantial other elements.
Okay,
Unless someone just starts building and
well, that would be illegal, so, you know.
I can take you to many homes that were just built in wetlands.
And I think the one comment I forgot to make, I know, you're asking about what are the deterrents, why aren't, and aside from, there's just empirical evidence that it is a deterrent, I know one of the other reasons we're hearing is it's one separate and parallel appeal opportunity. And just know that's, Ted made a great point. I mean, the appeals are one of the biggest hindrances in development in Vermont. And not only having it at the municipal level, but then also through the Act 250 process, I know it gives developers a lot of heartburn. So if you can get through your municipal process with a certain number of units, you may not want to open up the opportunity for another round of appeals.
Well, thanks for bringing this one up. We asked this question yesterday, or I asked the question yesterday, was although we often hear about permitting being duplicative, always that Act 250 is duplicative of what's happening at the municipal level. No one says, I went through Act 250, I now earned a rebuttable presumption of compliance on X, Y, and Z. Why is the municipality asking me the same question over again? So does that seem like a valid question too? It feels to me like there's a history of only going one way on who's duplicating, as opposed to saying it's fair game to say either process can duplicate the other. And in some cases, Act 250 might be a superior process for a project, and maybe in others it's the municipal process, but no one wants to do it twice.
Right.
I don't know why it's always Act 250 that's called the duplicative process. Well, I should say, too strong a word, is often characterizes the duplicative.
I have something about that. But maybe I will let some.
We should have lunch on that one.
Yeah. Any comments I have would be speculating, but I think I'd echo some of Ted's comments that in certain places, maybe Act 250 is a better tool. In other places, the municipality is actually the better tool. And so folks would say, well, this statewide sort of blanket rule is my duplicative because I'm here in my town and this is what we said our zoning planning, but that's just me speculating. But to that point, I really say, I'm happy to help get other developers in here that aren't the usual suspects. I mean, personally, it's good to hear from our polished professionals like Evernorth. I mean, Kathy Byer just knows the system inside and out. And it's also good to hear from folks who just build scale and they might have different reasons for going through different permitting processes. So happy to help if the community has an interest. So open.
Yeah.
Open also.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, I think what I struggle with is some of the argumentation doesn't feel very persuasive when it comes to developers think this is hard, so they avoid it. Like, that's not persuasive enough for me when I look at what the criteria are, when it's like sufficient water, unreasonable congestion or unsafe condition of traffic or highways, unreasonable burden on educational facilities, like all of these questions should have an answer and would make the development itself flourish in a better way in a community to have those questions answered. So what I struggle with is, I understand it may be difficult for a developer to go through that process. It is much more difficult for a community to have to respond to bad development or development that does not meet the needs or overburdens the municipality than it is to plan and understand the implications of the development beforehand. It feels like one of the benefits is that it kind of shapes and questions are brought up and things that people don't think about come up. And I really respect the work that I've seen that our local planners and our regional planners have done. So I need to feel more confident in going against this and having those exemptions to really understand why those questions are A, so hard for developers to answer, and B, why the delay in time that they are telling us they are experiencing is so great. So I really do need some data to back up some of the anecdotal examples, because I want to agree with you, I really do. I want to understand and support sections of 311, but I just haven't been given information that is compelling enough yet. And I'm sure if you have that information, you will share it.
I'm not being a developer, I'm not the one that would have the information as to why developers avoid it. I don't think anyone's questioning that developers do avoid it.
Sure.
And
But
so I think that
anyone avoiding regulation, okay. Yeah, exactly. You should also restaurants should also meet regulatory standards, so we have safe food, and it might be harder, but like.
No, understood, and I think what we're talking about is a framework in which we're giving a little bit more deference to what's been put in place at the municipal level, because it does answer a lot of those important questions.
Okay.
And then from my seat, my job is, what's an environment that does foster more housing?
Yes.
Well, if they're saying, if developers will build to this threshold, and I can tell you that they will, then I can say that if this threshold changes, they will, as Charlie indicated before, the market will change along with those changes.
I think, it's probably a refrain here, but I don't say, we say, I have said, and I think others say as well. Good planning is good planning. It can happen at any level. I never hear any objection to those questions. Like, I've never heard anyone say, actually, those are the wrong questions, or that's too many questions. Like, I don't think. So our concern is that a thought gets put into something so that we have development that's consistent with municipal goals, regional goals, etc. And think that the cheapest time to fix something before you ever do it.
Bingo, exactly.
I think the municipalities do a fair job of that, though. I mean, Ted, I'll look at you if you agree or disagree, but.
Ted will disagree.
But we shouldn't burden them to make all of those decisions.
And I think what this relies on is giving the municipalities that have done that work, the deference, and then the municipalities that still need our help, still giving them that protection.
Yet another harmonious note to end on. I will, I don't know, and Mr. Cochran, we didn't end up in the chairs this morning. Would you like to be, and we're needing to switch to another topic momentarily, would you like a reschedule so that I'm guessing we should hear from you directly, but I don't know how you handle it out of your shop.
Well, we have two things. Chris Cochran from the Department of Housing and Community Development. The two things that we'd like to talk about is the Home Act technical corrections.
Okay.
Some of this is picked up in 311, but we worked closely with Representative Bongartz on the initial bill that kind of inspired this.
Okay.
So we'd like to talk you through that a little bit. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is there's an increase to the downtown and village center tax credits in this bill. However, the policy language that aims to help our downtowns right now recover more quickly was not included. And this language also helps many of our mitigate future risks, helping our downtown businesses get their utilities out of their cellars, and et cetera.
Sure.
I don't think we need a whole bunch of testimony on that. I can just give you the language.
Okay, well, we're gonna be almost 311 all the time for a while, so we will schedule the time, so thank you. Let's take a brief break and reconvene please at 5 minutes after 11. At that point, we'll take up the amendment on 258. Walk through it, discuss it, take it to the commission. 11:30, we turn to 259. I'll refer to it as predictable.